The Winnipeg Jets have made a number of moves to try to overcome the loss of Nikolaj Ehlers, but is it enough? Harrison Lee of Locked On Winnipeg Jets joined us to discuss that and what the Jets need to do this season to be successful. All that and more coming up on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Gil Martin here. Welcome, everybody, to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an episode. This episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, Harrison Lee. And it's been a busy offseason for the Winnipeg Jets. But the big news is a subtraction. Nikolaj Ehlers no longer with the team. He moves on to Carolina. How are the Jets working to overcome this loss?
Well, they've done a lot of signings. They brought in like 3 or 4 new guys. I guess if you can point to any particular signing that's supposed to be the replacement for Ehlers, it's probably Gustav Nyquist. They brought him in for a year, $3.25 million. I think the reality, though, is that I don't know that they've actually found the Ehlers replacement, like what Nick brings to the team, his transition game, his improvement on this year's power play. I still think they have yet to really fill that void. I think they've brought in a lot of stopgap options for a lot of departing players, but I don't really look at any one signing as having been the one that actually replaces Nick. What's sort of funny, though, is like when you think about it, because he was underutilized, in some ways the Jets may not miss him as much as they probably should. But I do think when you look at who kind of gets promoted in his place and some adjustments to special teams and just the general reduction in team speed, I think you're going to notice it in other ways. And you know, what he does in Carolina, I do have an idea of what's going to happen there. I don't know if it's going to be like beyond my wildest dreams, but I think he's going to do pretty darn well with an increased role on a team like that.
So are there any young prospects in the pipeline who, even if it's a couple of years down the road, could, because you mentioned stopgap, are there a couple of guys who could, in a year or two, step in and pick up some of that slack?
The only guy who has anywhere near the same kind of skill set is probably Brad Lambert, and I don't know how the team feels about him. Last year, he had an NHL stint for, a couple of games. I don't think he really looked 100% comfortable at the NHL level. I do think that partly, his last season with the Moose, he looked like he had a really big step back, but Manitoba was just a terrible team. So he was still top 3 in team scoring, but I don't think he took over the AHL like a lot of people were hoping. And so, I think he's one of those kids that really thrives on confidence and playing with skill. I don't know if that's really going to translate this year. And I would think it'd have to take a really big preseason and camp for him to really impress enough to get into this year's lineup. I do think he's on the short list for call-ups in case of injury, but beyond him, I just don't think the Jets really have anyone quite like Ehlers in their system. Lambert's the only one who comes close, and he's a little bit of a lottery ticket right now. So long and short of it is, I wish they had more. They have a lot of other intriguing archetypes for players like Kevin He, Kieran Walton, and some of these guys who will play different kinds of roles in games, but no one that I would say is a 1-to-1 or even like a 0.75 to 1 to what Ehlers is.
Jonathan Toews now coming back to Manitoba and joining the Winnipeg Jets. What can we expect from him? I mean, is anything he provides a bonus, or do you think he has a specific role on this team that he'll fill?
Lord, I wish I knew that answer. I think that's kind of where a lot of us are, is that, ideally he would have been your fourth line center. He brings a lot of leadership and veteran experience. He's been there. He's been a multi-cup winner. In his prime, he was one of the best centers in the league. But he's been 2 years off the ice, dealing with recovery from long COVID. He really hasn't said much about his own physical state beyond the fact that he wants to play. But he did admit that, the feet are still catching up. And I think that's probably pretty telling that, the first few months with him could be a bit of a learning curve. Toews is kind of coming in to be the Jets 2C, especially with Lowry starting the year on injured reserve. I just don't really know how this is all going to work. Toews ideally, I think, would, come in and be a plug and play player, but I think we all know that's just not that likely. A lot of people have said, oh, but Harrison, it's going to be like Landeskog, or look at Marchand, he's still playing. And I'm like, these guys have been in and around hockey, whether actively playing for an NHL squad or rehabbing with their orgs for years. That's not what Toews has been doing. He was in India, quite literally, taking a different treatment route. So I just don't know what to expect. And with what the Jets have kind of projected a little bit, I think they're suggesting he's going to be the 2C, and I feel like that's probably not the plan that I would personally go with. I think he'll be fine on the power play, but at 5v5, I just don't really feel comfortable with where his game's going to be at, and it might not really improve much. You might be looking at a guy who, in the ideal state, is really your 4C, but he's going to have to play elevated minutes if he's physically capable of it, and we don't even know if that's the case either. So this is a really weird black box that I don't think anyone has a clear vision on. And like the pushback I get from Jets fans is he knows his body better than you do. And I'm like, sure, but he also has incentive to actually get back in the league. He'll say what he needs to say and do what he needs to do to play. But that doesn't mean that, at this stage of his career, he's, already late 30s. How, in game shape is he really going to be? And it's a tough call. So, all that to say, he is a huge X factor. I think your best guess is he's a bottom six center who might have to do more for the Jets, given the fact that Winnipeg really doesn't have a lot of high-end center depth right now.
What is your biggest concern surrounding this team with training camp about a month away?
Well, the Jets still haven't figured out the Kyle Connor question, and this is probably one of the biggest decisions the franchise is ever going to make. With Hellebuck and Scheifele, those contracts really weren't that expensive. Obviously, Helly is the most important player to the team, but Kyle is coming into an era of the league where revenue's way up, the cap's going up. So his next deal is going to be a 10-figure contract, 8-figure contract. And that's never been a thing the Jets have done before. The max they've paid somebody is like $8.5 million, 8.75. They have never gone, 10, 11, 12 mil. And so this is like a huge question because whatever they do with Connor really decides what they do with this core. If he gets traded, which is extremely unlikely, then you'd be looking at a very different scenario. And I think the haul that you get for him could completely change Winnipeg's top 9. But if you resign him, you are now looking at a clock is ticking kind of situation as if it wasn't already. This team's already past 30. They have one of the older rosters in the league. Losing Ehlers and swapping them with, a number of veterans really doesn't fix things. And so I just think the Jets have really accomplished one of the most incredible regular season feats. But when it comes to the playoffs, they're still not really well prepared for it. And that's where I feel like, there continues to be maybe some stagnancy. And this last year was a really big improvement for their postseason run. They won 6 games. That's a huge change over what happened in previous runs. I think they won like 1 game in their last 2 playoffs, which is just crazy. And then this one, they had 6 games. Awesome. They realistically could have beaten the Stars, I think, if they had had a better trade deadline. And I will still stand behind that regardless of what people say. But, it is what it is, right? I just think this team is somebody said that they're kind of looking at maybe becoming the Isles in a few years, but kind of in the Lou era rather than the new Darsh, approach. And that's kind of something that's on my peripheral, and I'm thinking about it in the longer term. So these next 2 to 3 years, the Jets have to figure this out because, they need to figure out if they want to really believe in this core and roll with it, because if they do, they've got to add more to it. Or if they're thinking about the future and the fact that things are changing, they might want to start that transition with some of their kids now. And I do think at least one or two rookies might be filtering in this year.
Pivotal time, crossroads for the Winnipeg Jets. Harrison, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
You can find us at Locked On Winnipeg Jets. We're on all the same platforms that Locked On NHL is. And you can find me on social media at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets.
All right, Harrison, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at Monarch Money. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there's Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Monarch Money does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. So don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNHL. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL.